In this lesson, you will learn a paragraph structure that you will use over and over again in both language arts and social studies this year. It's called an analysis paragraph. Within your analysis paragraph, you are going to write a claim or argument about a text. That text might be a literary text or an informational text. Today, we're going to look at how to write an analysis paragraph about a literary text. Your first sentence within your analysis paragraph is your claim statement. This is your crystal clear statement about what you're arguing in the paragraph. Your only goal in your analysis paragraph is to prove that that one statement is true. Throughout the year, we're going to highlight our analysis paragraphs with different colors, the different components. So we're going to highlight our claim statements in green. My next component is my introduction to evidence, and this is where I provide the context for the evidence that I'm going to use to prove that my claim is true. This is probably the hardest component for students to wrap their heads around, so if you don't get this today, if this doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. Remember that this is just formative. One of the questions I'm going to ask when I'm thinking about my introduction to evidence, I'm going to ask the question, what does the reader need to know to understand my piece of evidence? So let's actually look at a piece of evidence. I made an inference about character motivation in Leona's story. So one of the pieces of evidence that I used was this one, that Citizens Information Center told me to the Citizens Information Center told me to call the Public Health Department. They sent me to someone else. They're all trained to be slippery snakes. So when I ask myself, what does the reader need to know to understand this piece of evidence? One of the things that you need to know is that Leona was trying to get the government to take the trash or to remove the trash from the lot. So that would be what I would include in my introduction to evidence. Leona is working to get the government to remove the trash from the lot. That quote wouldn't make sense if you didn't know that. Next is my evidence, and you are pros at evidence, so I'm not going to talk much about it. This is your word for word quote from the text. You are going to put it in quotation marks. Remember, you're going to put in parentheses the page number and then your period. Your explanation is the longest section of your analysis paragraph. This is where you really explain your thinking in detail. You need to show me in your explanation how your evidence proves that your claim statement is true. Today, your claim is about a character inference, an inference you're making, about character motivation. Later, that might be a claim about the theme of the story. That might be a claim about the mood or the tone of the story. Today, it's about character motivation, an inference about character motivation. So today, you're going to show me how your evidence, you're going to explain how your evidence proves that your inference is true about either one of the characters, and thank you, ma'am. This is your longest section. It's 3 to 5 sentences, and it's really important that you really give me as much detail as possible. The more detail you can give me, the better your grade will be, I promise. Your concluding statement is last. Your concluding statement is just where you restate your claim in a new way. So let's try to write one together. Let's look at one that I've written. You actually have the paragraph that we're going to look at on the back of your assignment. So if you want to make sure you have your assignment out in front of you, that you've turned it over and that you have this paragraph in front of you, that's going to help you as we work through the lesson. So I went through the same format, and I asked a question about character motivation within Leona's story as you did in Thank You, Ma'am. So I asked, why did Leona take the trash to the public health department? So the inference that I made, my guess, using clues from the text, was that she did that to make the government listen to her complaint. And one of her other pieces of motivation was that she was frustrated that they weren't listening to her. So I already talked to you about the quote on page 3 that the Citizens Information Center told me to call the Public Health Department. They sent me to someone else. They're all trained to be slippery snakes. The quote that I'm actually going to use within my paragraph, however, and it's going to be pink, is this. When people talk to you on the phone, you're nothing but a voice. And when you're on hold, you're not even that. I had to make myself real to them. So, one of the things you're going to need to do when you decide, when you make the choice about which inference you want to write your analysis paragraph about, go back through and make sure that you have the strongest piece of evidence that supports that inference. So, of the two, I think that this second one is a stronger piece of evidence to support this inference that the government, she wants to make the government listen to her complaint. So, first is going to be my claim statement. I'm gonna clearly state what I'm arguing in the paragraph. So that's going to be my inference here. So in green, I'm going to highlight this. Actually, let's just read it once through. Leona takes the trash to the public health department to make the government listen to her complaint. After making multiple phone calls, Leona thinks up a new plan for how to get the government to listen. When people talk to you on the phone, you're nothing but a voice, and when you're on hold, you're not even that. I had to make myself real to them. Leona refuses to give up on getting the trash in the lot cleaned up, even though all of her phone calls are ignored. In this quote, she argues that when you hear a complaint over the phone, that it's easy to distance yourself from the problem. She believes that if she can show the government how serious the problem is, that they'll listen. So she decides to take the trash to them. When the problem is sitting in your lobby, stinking up the place, it's hard to ignore. Leona is not taking no for an answer, and she believes this is the way to get the government to finally clean up the lot. So let's read through our paragraph. Let's work through our paragraph and see if we can find all of the components to an analysis paragraph. So my first component is going to be my claim statement, my crystal clear statement. So for me, that is this. Leona takes the trash to the public health department to make the government listen to her complaint. My whole paragraph is working right now to prove that this inference is true, that she is trying to make the government listen to her complaint. So here's my textual evidence, right? When people talk to you on the phone, you're nothing but a voice. And when you're on hold, you're not even that. I had to make myself real to them. So, but remember, I need to introduce my evidence. And within my introduction to my evidence, I'm going to answer the question, what does the reader need to know to understand my evidence? What's the context? So here's my introduction. Here's what I thought you as a reader of my paragraph needed to know to understand this piece of textual evidence. After making multiple phone calls, Leona thinks up a new plan for how to get the government to listen. If you didn't know that Leona had already made multiple phone calls, this quote wouldn't make as much sense. So that's what I thought you needed to know. Okay, here's my explanation. Remember that in my explanation, I'm going to explain my thinking in as much detail as possible, and I'm also going to show you how my evidence supports my claim or my inference. So Leona refuses, let's highlight it in blue. This is my explanation. Leona refuses to give up on getting the trash in the lot cleaned up, even though all her phone calls are ignored. In this quote, she argues that when you hear a complaint over the phone, that it's easy to distance yourself from the problem. Notice that this last sentence, I'm not just proving to you, I'm not just explaining how my evidence supports my claim, I'm actually explaining my evidence to you. That's great to do within your explanation. She believes that if she can show the government how serious the problem is, that they'll listen. So she decides to take the trash to them. When the problem is sitting in your lobby, stinking up the place, it's hard to ignore. Through my explanation, I know it looks long, right? My blue section is going to be the longest section of my paragraph. But through my blue section, through my explanation, I prove to you this inference that Leona, her motivation for taking the trash to the public health department is to make them listen. Okay, last is the easy part. This is just my restating of my inference, my restating of my claim in a new way. So here we go. Leona is not taking no for an answer, and she believes that this is the way to get the government to finally clean up the lot. Okay, your job right now is to choose one of your inferences that you made about character motivation within Thank You, Ma'am. I encourage you to choose the inference that has the strongest evidence because you are going to need to do a lot of writing about it. And then write your analysis paragraph. Okay, if you have questions, feel free to ask.